Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live, and it is my honor to welcome our special guest today, writer-director Ivan Kavanagh. Ivan, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, yeah. Glad to be here.
It is our honor to have you here with us. So let's get started. We have a lot of questions for you. First of all, we're going to get to your amazing recent movie, Son, in a second. I was just looking over your resume on IMDb, and it looks like you got your professional start in 2003. So walk us through how it all started with that short film that you got in 2003.
Well, I was always I'm from a very working class background in Dublin, and where I'm from, no one ever became filmmakers. The idea of becoming a filmmaker, you might as well, said you wanted to be an astronaut or something. It was something just beyond my reach. But my mother, I remember when I was about 12 or 13, bought a high 8 video camera, which was a really low end home video camera.
Uh huh.
And one day I just picked it up and I started to film some stuff. And then I made some short films with my friends. And I remember I used to use two VCRs back to back to edit them together.
The old
And
days.
then the old days, yeah. And then when the digital revolution happened in the 90s, I bought three digital cameras. I got a bank loan to buy my own editing equipment, and I showed one of my short films to a friend of mine, and he said, you should show it, send it into a festival or something.
Hmm.
And to be honest with you, I had never thought of that. I was just making them from myself.
Yeah.
And I sent it into my very first film, uh, what I consider my first film, into a festival, and I won an award there. So it
The, re-
just snowballed from there. It was just
the, the rest
wasn't
is
planned. It just happened.
the rest is history, as they say.
Absolutely.
I want to get to your latest movie that came out this year, and that's Son. It stars the brilliant young actress that the majority of us got to meet in Halloween 2018, and that's Andy Matichak. First of all, you wrote Son and you directed Son. It's an amazing film. Let's start with the writing part. How did you come up with what I call the modern day version of the Omen movies?
Oh yeah. I suppose I didn't think of it about the Omen, but I suppose it is. Yeah, it's a little bit like that. I mean, it really started like all my films. It kind of started from a very personal place. Um, my son was born. My first son was born about 5 years ago, and he had a very difficult birth. And me and my wife were very worried about him for the first few months of his life. And I began to see how close him and my wife were becoming, though. I saw firsthand that mother and son bond, how strong and close that can be. And I began to think, is there anything a mother who loved her son wouldn't do to protect him? How far would she go to make him well again if he was ill? And so during those sleepless nights when we were up with the baby, and I just start jotting down ideas. And yeah, and then once I jotted those initial ideas, it just flowed out of me then straight after. So it came from a very, very personal place, which was my worry about my own son,
and,
which was this helplessness I felt as I looked at him, that I couldn't do anything to help him.
and I could
Uh,
totally understand my
yeah,
second born, which is my first son. I have three
yeah.
children. He spent 2 years in the ICU as a baby right after birth.
Oh
So
my
I
God.
totally understand what you're talking about. I mean, I feel I've been there. I've been
Yeah,
there. Not
yeah,
knowing on your newborn child if they're going to live or
yeah.
die. Luckily,
Absolutely,
yeah, yeah. Go on. I'm
absolutely.
sorry.
And it's, yourself, it's when you have a kid, you just realize, you do anything for this kid. It's and then the mother is this biological connection that the father doesn't have. And it's even closer. So it's one step even further than that. So
Totally,
it's
totally understand that. Now, how did the cult, the demonic figure, when did that start coming into play as you were starting to think of ideas for this script?
um I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't do any research about cults or anything like that. But I mean, nobody really has to. We've all heard those urban legends, or maybe not urban legends, about cults and satanic cults and stuff like that,
Yeah.
um, I was thinking that because I wanted to call into question the character Laura's sanity, is she telling, is what she's saying real or imagined? I thought the idea of bringing this kind of very conspiracy theory cult into it would be a way to show that,
Yeah.
this, about this satanic cult. So, I mean, the way I structured the film was that we see what she sees, but then the next scene, someone else says, "Well, that didn't happen that way," and then again we see what she sees, and then it didn't happen that way again. So it was all about calling into questioning her sanity, or whether she's imagining in it or not, or whether it's real. And also, I was thinking a lot about male violence as well,
Hmm.
and the idea that if a son inherits a certain aspect of his father's temperament, of his father's DNA, as in this violence inside him, is there anything a mother can do really to change that?
Hmm.
The boy is, after all, in the film, he's half his mother, he's half good, but he's also half his father as well. So I thought that was an interesting question to raise in the film.
I thought it was very amazing and realistic that by the end of the film, we start to realize, first of all, the scope and the reach of this cult. It's very wide reaching, and people have been watching her and her son for many years.
Yeah,
There were people planted in her life all throughout, even down to the policeman at the end. But
yeah,
Laura reaches a point at the end of the film where she goes, I can't do this anymore. I can't continue doing this. So she goes back to the place where it all started, back in her childhood home in that bedroom, and
yeah,
she was willing to end it all, summoning up that demon again.
yeah.
Um, an amazing ending. Did you have different versions on how you wanted to get to that part, or was it really straightforward for you to, this is the route I want to take to that scene in the bedroom between Laura and her son, and then the cops coming in?
No, it was always heading towards that. I mean, the image of the bed was, where this horror happened. Whether it was her father who raped her, or whether it was the demon. Each of them are equally horrific. Whatever the truth is, it was all about this bedroom, all about that bed, and it was all about her having to go back and face that again.
Hmm.
And face her trauma. And then, I mean, once she has blood on her hands, once she accidentally kills that police officer, that's when she says, enough is enough. It just, this evil is just going to keep unfolding from this. There is no good end to this. The only end I can possibly give my son is to try and convince the demon to make him a real rhythm of this curse he has. But there is no real
No,
hope for her.
no. It's like the way I saw it was like a desperate mother trying one last attempt at something that she thinks might work, and that is
Yeah.
to summon the demon and have him reverse the curse. But in reality, that was never going to happen. That was never going
No.
to happen. And
Yeah.
uh, now,
Another
oh,
another film I was thinking just before. I was thinking of I love David Cronenberg's film The Brood,
yes,
and he always saw that as this strange kind of a custody battle, but it was like his Kramer versus Kramer. He
yeah,
said, and
yeah,
I thought in a strange way after I finished it writing this, I was thinking, well, this is kind of a custody battle between the father and the mother, for custody of the boy's soul and his future,
yeah.
and it makes it extra chilling that part of his father is going to be nurtured after the film is over, and
As the
you know,
writer of this script, did you end it in a way that it could be open ended for a possible sequel, or are you satisfied with this being a one and done?
well, this was a really tough shoot. So during it, one of the producers said to me, "Have you thought of a sequel yet?" Because everyone thought it felt kind of open ended for a sequel, and I said, "There's no way I'm ever going back to this," Yeah, this shoot is a nightmare. It's I never want to revisit this again. But then, my producer friend Anne Marie Nocton, who produced the film, she always says making a film is like childbirth. You forget the pain until you're
Yeah,
back on the
yeah.
table again. I don't know that, of course, but I know what she means.
I know. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So after it was finished, I said I actually thought of an amazing idea to continue it. So if anyone's interested in financing it, absolutely. I have
Oh,
a great idea for it.
that'd be great. Now, you got the script. You're done with it. Okay. Walk us through what how did you get financing, first of all, for a studio to pick it up, to go from script to actually shooting the
Fine.
film, as you being picked to director. How Walk us through how that happened from the moment you finished the script, or did you have a production studio while you were still finishing the script?
Well, we know I had a production company that's Park Films, who I made the Canal with, my previous horror film,
Okay.
and the Canal was very well received. It premiered at Tribeca, got amazing reviews. So, um, on the strength of that, it was actually quite easy to, and the Western I made previous, it was actually quite easy to get the financing together for this. The Screen Ireland, partially, which is the funding body in Ireland, they partially funded the development of the script. So they were involved from the very beginning. So once they're on board, and my production company, who I always work with, and then our American and UK co-producers came on, and then Shudder, AMC,
Yeah.
RLJ came in. They had we got a pre-sale with them for the US and all English-speaking territories for Shudder,
There you go.
and it just came together really quickly. Then.
Uh, That's very fortunate. That's very good. Very lucky. I mean, they saw the potential in this movie. How was it that you were picked to direct it? Was that your idea, or did they come to you and say, "We want you to direct this"?
No, I mean I'm a writer director. I always write everything. I always direct everything I've ever written.
Okay.
So that was never in question. I mean, this is Ivan's next film. So
Awesome.
that was never a question.
Now, Andy Matichak. Okay, like I said, we were introduced to Andy in the Halloween 2018. Brilliant
Yeah,
up and coming actress. I mean, brilliant.
yeah, she's amazing.
When was she brought in, casted to play Laura for this movie?
Well, my American producer Rene Bastien, Belladonna Films, he had worked with her. Oh no, he had auditioned her and got to know her on a previous project of his, and he was kind enough to share an audition tape that she did for that film, and she was just so natural. She was great. Then after that, I watched Halloween,
Mm,
and I thought she was amazing in that.
yeah.
So I hadn't seen Halloween when we were already considering her.
Okay.
Then we set up a Skype between me and her, and we just hit it off immediately. She saw the film the way I saw it. I have, I suppose, quite unorthodox working methods. I don't work the way some other directors work, and she was completely open to working my way. She was willing to go as far as I wanted to go with the character, really push the emotions of the piece. Andy's amazing.
Yes.
She's just on the set. She's an amazing presence. She's Everyone loves her.
She's going to be a
Um,
huge star.
oh yeah,
She already
absolutely.
is.
She already is,
Yeah.
and you can see, I think, in Sun, which I think is her best performance,
Yeah.
that I think you can see her range in there. I mean,
Yeah.
she goes from Halloween playing essentially a teenager, and then in Sun, she's completely believable as this young mother,
Young
who's
mother.
who's protecting her son. She's amazing. Yeah, she's a big career ahead of her, I think. I'd love to, and we plan to work together again in the future. Hopefully, I like to work with people that I enjoy working with
Yeah.
on multiple occasions. So hopefully
Absolutely.
again soon.
Absolutely. One of the most amazing scenes in the movie is towards the beginning when she runs away from the cult, and she's pregnant and she's in a car, and she basically gives birth on her own in the car.
Yeah.
And does that go back to that mother son bond you were talking about, where she was wanting to kill the child because she knows what that child is a product
Mm.
of, But as
Yeah.
soon as she sees that baby and is holding it in her hand, it
Yeah.
all just goes away. How hard was it
Yeah.
shooting that?
Oh, I mean, the whole film was tough to shoot. That's a novel in itself, you know. But that was particularly, I mean, it was, we shot the film in Mississippi just before the pandemic
Yeah.
hit. I mean, we shot that in a field in the middle of nowhere. We had rain machines that night. It was absolutely freezing. I think it was January or February when we shot that. That particular scene was really tough to shoot. And then we had prosthetics with the fake baby, and we had a real baby in the middle of the night as well,
Oh
which was really
God.
tricky. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was particularly tough, you know. And it was a tough thing to do because getting the tone right, you know,
Yeah.
because she does want to kill it when it comes out until she sees it, and then she sees this sweet, normal looking baby, and she loves it instantly. You know, she falls in love with it. Um, yeah, it was a tough one in all aspects, photography wise, special effects wise, rain and acting. You know, that was a tough night.
So you said this whole movie was very tough for you directing. Besides that scene, I mean, was it just conditions? Was there just stuff going wrong on the set? Was there delays? What made this such a really tough movie to direct?
Well, see, originally our budget, I think, was about 3.5 million or something like that, or 4 million, and it was non-union. And then halfway through the shoot, we got flipped, so suddenly became a union show. So all of a sudden, I lost a huge amount of my budget
Yeah, I know.
because it's going to guys sitting on the edge of a truck. It's going to Teamsters, you know.
Yeah,
So
I know. Yeah.
yeah, so that was my first experience working in America as well. And then there was just stuff that we couldn't control, like the weather. We had two tornadoes that struck us during the shoot.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a scene that I don't remember when she visits the mother of an old friend, Mrs. Nagel, in the
Yes.
middle of nowhere,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and you can see a tree that's on top of the house almost.
Yeah.
Well, the night we were supposed to shoot there, a tornado tore through that particular part of Mississippi, lifted a 300-year-old tree out of the ground and planted it right on top of the house where we were supposed to shoot,
Wow.
right into our set.
Jeez.
It was just stuff like that. We had to stop multiple times because you can't shoot if lightning is within 7 miles of the set, stuff
Yeah.
like that. We had multiple lightning storms. I think that particular day, that was probably the worst day. We had that Mrs. Nagel scene. I think we had the whole day to shoot, but I actually only had about 2 hours of actual shooting time because we had to shut things down because of lightning and weather and tornadoes, and it was just crazy. You talk about a cursed film. This film really
It was
felt cursed,
cursed.
you know.
So,
Yeah,
so your first shoot in America did not leave a good impression on you.
No, I mean the crew was amazing though, I have to say. I mean, they were completely behind my vision for the film. They went above and beyond. There wasn't anybody's fault. It was just the conditions or the weather. It was just the way things happened, and then losing part of my budget as we were shooting wasn't
So,
the best thing to happen either.
so did the movie? Was it because you did shoot it before COVID? Was it scheduled for a theatrical release and just pushed back to video on demand, or because like companies like Shudder, which is owned by AMC, it was going to be
Yeah.
a straight to video on demand release from the beginning?
Well, it did get a short back in March. It did get like about 2 weeks in the cinema. It was only
Okay.
on about 30 screens in the US, but people weren't going to the cinemas,
No.
and there wasn't anywhere open. I mean, we couldn't get beyond 30 screens. There just wasn't any. So the idea was always to release theatrically, but nobody knew when. It was just such a confusing time. I mean, do we wait or do we release the film now? When do we do it exactly? We knew we had this looming release date with Shudder, and which is July 8th, which is next month.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew we had to release it in the cinemas and on DVD before that. So we decided to go in March. In retrospect, we should have held out maybe a bit later, but then again, we'd be competing with this backlog of a huge amount of films.
Oh
So,
yeah.
I mean, so there wasn't any date for cinema, but the plan always was to release in the cinema.
So I saw the movie when it first came out, I think it was the first day it was released on video on demand. I bought it. We bought it, and I
Yeah,
watched it on Vudu. So the movie is coming to Shutter for Shutter subscribers in July.
July 8th, I think it is. I think that was just a press release today, actually, coincidentally.
Oh, that's amazing. That's good
Yeah,
to know.
yeah,
So all Shutter subscribers will be able to watch it. This movie has gotten great reception from critics, from fans, from
yeah.
watched it. Were you even surprised at just how good the reception of this for this movie has been?
Well, I mean, it's always a bonus. I mean, it's always great when someone connects your films. But the history of my films, I mean, with the Canal, that got great initial reception as well. Never Grow Old, the Western I did, it was critically great as well. But my films always turn up on those, you know, great movies you haven't seen lists, or lost or unseen gems and stuff like that,
Yeah.
or underrated films. So I fully expected that to happen with Sun as well. But I have to say, more people have probably seen this than my two previous films, so which is great. And it did very, very, very well on VOD.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I definitely see that. Now
Yeah.
tell us how you found Luke David Blum, who played the role of David. What was it like working with such a young actor, with him having to do such gruesome scenes? Did he require a lot of directing in his movements? Because he did have in that motel, to be
Yeah.
specific, with him, sort of crawling on the floor almost like an animal.
Yeah.
How much
Yeah.
directing did it need to get that scene the way you envisioned it?
Well, I'd worked with kids in quite prominent roles in my last two films. In the Canal was a big role for a kid, and so I have a lot of experience working with kids. And for me, it's always about keeping their mood up. It always treated like a game. I mean, on the Canal and on Sun, I mean, they never knew really what that they were in a horror movie. Not really. It was always like a game to them. And something I learned from the Canal is with Luke, sorry, was that to show him the mechanics of how things are made. So introduce him to how all the prosthetics work, so he knows the artifice of it. He knows how fake everything is, so
Yeah.
he's never afraid of any
Yeah.
of that. But the search for the kid was a tough one. I auditioned about 500 kids, and we initially looked only in New York and Los Angeles just to start. I didn't like any of the kids. I mean, some of them are great, but they were very movie-ish kids. And I wanted a real child, someone who felt like a real child, not an actor. So I suggested to the casting directors that we start looking locally, in Mississippi and Atlanta, Georgia, places like that. And then we just, out of the blue, I got this tape, audition tape from Luke, and he just stood out immediately as being so natural and so likable, instantly likable on camera. So I drove down the next day to Atlanta to meet him, and I met him and his father, Matthew. Now, Matthew is the key person in this who really helped me. Matthew is an actor himself, so he
Oh,
knows. He was able to coach Luke. So I was able to say things to Matthew like, Luke should watch Cries and Whispers, or you should watch Cries and Whispers by Ingmar Bergman, and look at how the woman in that suffers physically from cancer. Look at the reaction she gives when she's in pain, and then you can convey that to Luke. So what he did was he watched it and then showed Luke how to get that kind of physical reaction, that screaming, that writhing around in pain. So by the time he came to the set, he was very, very prepared. And then I just had to give him very, very minimal direction. But for the whole crawling along the floor scene, that was something I had very specific in my mind.
that
So
was
I was
very
able,
creepy.
yeah, this creepy image, and it's equally confusing as well, because Luke is kind of, I mean, he's not really a bad guy. He doesn't. I mean, he's a nice kid, basically. So it's a strange one how you feel about that scene, and you want him to get to the pimp and help his mother.
Yeah.
So
You're
you're
actually
conflicted
rooting
there
for him to get to the
to
bad
kill
guy.
the pimp.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
eat him because
yeah,
the
yeah,
guy's, well, he's a dick, to put it
yeah,
lightly.
yeah,
And you're rooting for this kid who's in pain. And those moments, like you said, and how you focused in on him writhing in pain and how well Luke
Yeah,
played those out. You felt
yeah,
for him. You felt for the mother and the position that she was in. And when she finally decided to step out of that motel room and approach this guy who, is a lowlife, right? And
yeah,
I'm going to feed him to my son. I have no choice.
yeah,
He's my son.
yeah, yeah,
And it's just one of so many scenes in that movie that is just phenomenal. The movie is very dark, especially with those dark and macabre paintings. The way it was shot, was that all part of your plan to make it a very, just, I mean,
yeah,
I guess it's kind of a silly question, but to make it all really dark in the cinematography and whatnot.
yeah. Well, I always saw it. I mean, the way I always saw it, and I said to Pierce McGrail, my cinematographer, who I've worked with in multiple films now, but I always saw it was kind of going from the Norman Rockwell view of America, this idyllic view, which you see very little of. But at the start of the film, when she's teaching the kids, and she's you have those brief scenes as she's driving her son to school, and then it kind of descends into this very taxi driver
Yeah.
hellish view of America, you know. So we did darken the colors or darken the contrast of the film as we went on. The film became more murky and dirtier looking as we went on. I mean, all those three motel they were basically sets. We built all those, and the way we planned it was each one would get progressively worse. So by the time she gets to the pimp motel, the one with the factory, I mean, she's basically in hell there. So we
Yeah.
really wanted to convey that sense of that she's in hell. I mean,
She's
this is.
yeah,
I mean,
she's no, go on, sorry.
we did things like we painted the walls with oil so they drip. They'd have this shiny, disgusting look, and we used very garish colors as well, neon colors, just to give this sense of this hellish nightmare that she's in.
Exactly, and that's what I was going to say. This woman is in a living nightmare. Now, in the beginning, Laura, before things start to go south, very close relationship with her son. Are we really to believe that she really thinks that she's in the free of clear of her son A being normal? There's nothing wrong with him, and there's no hint or doubt in her mind that there's nothing is going to happen. He's old enough. Nothing has happened. Nothing is going to happen. And B, she's free and clear of the cult as well.
I think she's always been looking over her shoulder all these years. She always, I think deep down, I mean, me and Andy discussed something we discussed a lot. I think she's always feared that the worst was going to happen, but after 8 years or 7 years, 8 years, I think she was probably just beginning to relax, thinking he's fine, everything's fine. They
Hmm.
haven't found me. They've just receded into the background. They wouldn't be stupid enough to come after me now. I mean, but they do. It comes back, or her past comes back to haunt her. There is no escaping the trauma she suffered. You know.
I have a specific question for you. We are led to believe in the movie that the what happens with David, her son, is because of the group broke into her house and they fed him that flesh. They fed him a piece of
Human
flesh,
flesh.
which
Yeah.
initiated the chain of events. If that never happened, and that let's say she did disappear and they did not know where she was, and David was never given that piece of flesh, uh, I guess it could go either way. Would he have lived a normal life and he never would have been afflicted with this?
Yeah, I think he probably would. You know, if he never had that, if he never tasted that, for want of a better uh, term, forbidden fruit,
Yeah,
I think he would have went on in this being only influenced by his mother. You know,
yeah.
and any bad aspect or evil aspect of him would have been suppressed by her, I think. But because he got that taste of his true nature, he just can't escape it from then
Exactly.
on, you know. And I think you're right. That's the terrible tragedy of it. If they hadn't have fed him that flesh, he would have lived a normal life, I think.
She would have had the life that she wanted for her and her son, and that makes it just
Yeah,
another aspect. It just makes it so tragic. which
Yeah,
adds to
yeah,
the film. Now, where
yeah.
does Sun compare in your heart with some of your other movies like Canal, which came out in 2014? You've done. There's another movie that you're working on that we're going to get to in a little bit. The Fading Light, and all your other movies. Where does Sun fit in your heart? Where does that fit, and in what place does that have in your heart in regards to other successful movies like Canal that you've done?
I don't know, man. They all feel like, yeah, everyone says this, but it feels like your children, really. I mean, it's a strange one. I mean, all the struggles and the pain you go through and the arguments you have to go with people and the struggling to get what you want on screen. You know, it feels like I always feel like I earned the film. I mean, I've been very lucky that I've been allowed to make the film. Always made the film that I want to make, and that was always the only thing I was after. The filmmakers I admired were always the ones who put the film first and put their own vision first. So whether people love them or hate them, um, uh, it doesn't really matter to me. It's as long as I like them, and I've always made the film just for me. And then the hope is that it will connect with enough people then after that, you know. So
That's the
I don't,
key. That's the key,
yeah,
I
I
think.
don't.
Yeah.
I don't hold it above any of the others. I think technically that whole pimp motel sequence is probably the best thing, most cinematic thing, and most consistently cinematic sequence I've ever done. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, it's almost, most of it is wordless. It's just pure cinema. It's been something I've been kind of striving for in each film. You know, I mean, there's a scene in Never Grow Old, the western I did with John Cusack just before that, where a character comes into a house, and when I look at it now, it's kind of a precursor to that scene where she's leading the pimp towards
Hmm.
the bathroom. You
Yeah.
know, so I think that particular sequence is probably the most cinematic sequence I've ever done, but it feels just as personal as all my other films. I mean, The Fading Light is probably the most personal film because it's actually about my family. But I feel like all my films are about family in a way. They're about love or lack of love, and they're about mothers and fathers and children. And
Yeah, that's what I was going to
yeah,
say. That it seems like a lot of your scripts you draw on from your own personal experience with your family and other life experiences.
yeah. I don't know how to do it any other way. I mean, I always feel like when I approach things more cynically, in a structural way, or say I want to follow these genre tropes, it just doesn't come out. But when I start with this always very personal place, it always just flows from that, and then all the genre stuff just comes in after, you know, more naturally. I I can probably pinpoint exactly where my love of horror came from, and where my preoccupations as a filmmaker came from is when I was 12 years old. My best friend, who was 12, he died, and I think it was the trauma of that, and the terror then I felt of death, and how fragile life is, and also about I had always had this fear of children dying, and
Wow.
it was. I think it came from that, and then around that period, I remember I saw is when I began to watch horror films. So they always the fear in them always felt really personal to me, you know, and that kind of then transferred to my own films. You know, I remember watching just after he died, I saw Salem's Lot,
Wow.
the Toby Hooper TV
Hmm.
series, and that scene where the boy is scratching on the window.
Yep.
Um, I remember that I felt that I've never since even been so scared by a film,
This,
just because I
yeah.
felt like it was my friend at the window. You know, it felt so terrifying to me. You know, I'll
S-
never forget it.
So horror has a real personal connection with you.
Yeah, it feels like
I mean, would
it
you
feels.
even say it's a way of dealing with the trauma of what happened to you at the age of 12?
Yeah, I mean, I never it never clicked that succinctly or that clearly with me, but um, my wife, who I've known now for 7 years, we've been married 3 years, but um, she's studying to be a psychologist, and she said it to me. I mean, and once she said it, it was so clear to me. It was, of course, you know,
It's your
it's
way of dealing
absolutely
with,
that's
yeah, it's like your
it's
way of
yeah,
dealing with the trauma.
it's like a therapy, and it's a way of controlling your fears, you know. Because as a director and a writer, you have complete control over these fears, you know. And part of being a director is having this control, or you know, and it's a way of dealing with fear and trauma. Absolutely, for me, it's totally personal.
Awesome. Well, not awesome for how it started. That's very tragic. But this is I got to say, this is the first time that I've spoke to anybody, whether it's a Hollywood person like yourself or a fan, doesn't matter. Where horror has such a personal, deep meaning, and that means a lot. So, at the age of 12, this horrible thing happens to you. What films you mentioned Salem's Lot, but at that age, 12, 13, 14, what are the films at that age for you that really made an impression on you?
Um, Around that age,
Yeah.
around that age is when I began to go into the video store by myself, and the section I always gravitated towards was the horror section, you know, because it was like forbidden, you know.
Yeah.
It was like, you know, it made it extra attractive, you know. I suppose all horror fans have that experience.
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, I remember I was ill, and I went down to my mother and father, and I told them I wasn't feeling very well, and they said sit down on the sofa, and my mother gave me some paracetamol or something. I can't remember, but they were watching the end of Rosemary's Baby. I remember.
Mm.
And it was that scene with "What have you done to his eyes?" and that amazing music, and Mia Farrow puts her hand to her mouth, and that moment just stuck with me. I mean, that stayed with me all my life. That experience, you know, was just so powerful, you know. Rosemary's Baby was a big one. When I saw The Shining for the first time, I probably saw The Shining quite late, about 10 years, about 1990, I think was the first time I saw it. So I was about 10 years old when I saw it, and that really got to me, but in a different sort of way, in a very filmic way. It was very, it frightened me a little bit, but I was more fascinated how brilliant technically it was, and I wanted to know how it was made, and it still has an endless fascination for me,
Oh
that
yeah.
particular film.
Especially with
The
that.
Texas
Oh, go on. I was just gonna say on The Shining, especially with that open-ended ending with Jack in that picture, which Kubrick left it up to the viewer to sort of
yeah,
make sense of that picture. Sorry, I interrupted you, but go on.
the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was another one. I just blew me away the first time I saw it. So that was, I think it's probably still the most visceral film experience I ever had. You know,
Yeah.
and I remember when I was about 12 or 13, we used to be in Dublin. There used to be this really small cinema called, I think it was called the Curzon Cinema. It was in the centre of Dublin, and they kind of got second run movies, you know.
Hmm.
And they used to let me in when I was about 12 and 13 to see absolutely anything, you know. And it was like, you know, I remember I saw a double bill for Taxi Driver and 48 Hours when I was only 13 maybe, and I
48
saw,
Hours with Eddie Murphy.
yeah, with Taxi Driver, it
With
was a
Taxi
double
Driver.
bill.
That's a weird combo
Yeah,
right there.
yeah, it was really strange. But at the same time, they're kind of, in my mind, they're kind of matched, because I remember there's a lot of very gritty street scenes in Walter Hill's film as well that kind of matched with me in my mind for Taxi Driver. But I remember I saw Poltergeist was another big one I saw on the cinema when I was very young. And I just loved that film. I loved the film experience of seeing that on the big screen, you know. That's a real treasured memory of seeing that on the big screen. It's a great movie. It's Toby Hooper again.
Yeah, Toby Hooper. It seems like you're a big Toby Hooper fan.
Well, I mean, I haven't seen quite a lot of them. I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love Poltergeist, and I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre too. I think it's a really crazy, fun movie. And I always felt sorry for Toby Hooper. I think he got a raw deal.
Well,
And
when I've always said this with movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre which is now a classic. It's etched in history. It's never going anywhere. History is what is going to dictate its place in the film
Absolutely.
world. Okay, the reviews it gets, especially with those classics like you mentioned, The Shining, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Poltergeist, and you could go on that list for a long time. But anyway, history is the judge that will let us know the movies that withstand the test of time. And
That's
all the
right.
movies you mentioned, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining, Poltergeist, those are the classics, and they're never going
Absolutely.
anywhere. Absolutely.
Well, you look at the reviews for The Shining when it came out. I mean, they were absolutely scathing,
Hmm.
and now, mainstream critics are falling over themselves to praise the film. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Another big one for me when I wasn't that young, but I saw it when it came out, and I went to see it 4 times. I remember on the cinema was David Lynch's film Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah.
That was a for me as a filmmaker. That was the film. I remember being blown away by the sound design and the raw emotion of that film. And that was another film that got absolutely
Yeah.
torn to pieces by critics when it came out.
Yeah.
And I remember I was so angry about it. I wrote into several film magazines saying, "You're all insane. This film is a masterpiece," and they never published them. But
No.
I did. I needed it to get out of my system,
I,
And I went. It was on for 1 week. I remember on in Dublin before it was hastily taken off, and
yeah.
I went to see it four times. I think it's a great movie. I think Cheryl Lee gives a absolutely stunning performance in there. It's just incredible,
I
incredible
always
stuff.
read a lot of critic reviews with my when I do my solo shows, and I always tell my viewers, listen, guys, this is one person's opinion, so I'll read
Yeah,
it, I'll read it for you, but take it with a
yeah,
grain of salt, okay? Please judge the
yeah,
movie on your own.
yeah,
It
yeah.
seems to me that you are a big fan of, I would say, paranormal slash supernatural films, and then slasher films come in a very close second. Would you agree with that?
No, I mean, I'm not really. I mean, slasher as in Texas Chainsaw
Yeah,
Massacre.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a big slasher guy. I love certain films. I like I admire Halloween, the original Halloween,
Yes.
more than I like it. But I prefer Black Christmas. That frightens me more.
Me
The
too.
Bob, the Bob, the Bob Clark film. I think it's creepier,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
something very. I feel like I need a shower after I watch that. I think it's a really effective film, and I think
Mm.
it predated Halloween, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. For me,
Yeah, yeah,
slasher movies are fun to watch, but they don't scare me. I mean, I enjoy them. The Halloween,
yeah,
the early Friday the 13th movies, the early Nightmare on Elm Street movies. But for me, to this
yeah.
day, the only subgenre that actually uh, gives an opportunity for a story character building, and it's still very scary for me, is the paranormal subgenre. That's what I love.
Yeah.
That's what to this day in the horror realm still can scare me. The rest don't scare me. Zombies don't scare me. Slasher
No.
flicks don't scare me. I enjoy watching them. But if I want to sit down and I want to get, creeped out, I'll watch a movie like Sun.
Yeah.
I love the Conjuring movies. Like, what's your opinion on like the Conjuring movies?
I like the first one. I didn't like the second one so much, but I like um
The
I liked the
original,
first
yeah.
one. I thought it was the original one. I thought that was very effective. I haven't seen any of the other one. How many is there now? There's three now. I haven't seen the
Yeah, the
third one.
third one is coming out actually this
Yeah,
week. In 3 days, it's coming out. It's called
yeah,
The Devil Made Me Do It, and
yeah,
it's a Warner Brothers film, so it's going straight to HBO Max and some limited theaters here in the United
well,
States. I don't know about worldwide.
yeah.
So moving forward in your career, do you see yourself branching out from horror, or you have absolutely no desire and you're perfectly happy and content with sticking with the horror realm?
No, I mean I love all types. I mean my taste is very eclectic in films. I love all. I mean my only criteria is do I like it or not. I mean I grew up in a household where all types of films were on, and my father's a real movie buff, and
Hmm.
he loved classic Hollywood movies, all genres. And my uncle was more into art house
Yeah.
uh, uh, foreign films, you know. And so I was exposed to a lot of stuff, and I still have a love of a lot of type of films. I did a western before this one. I'd love to go back to the western. It was I think I did made a pretty good western. I'm very proud of it. Um, I have an idea for another western, but right now, I mean, the ones I'm signing up for, or just about to sign up for, are all horror, and I think that's just because people see your last film, and that's what you get offered, you know. And it's very you always have to go with which ones are going to get financed, you know.
Yeah, exactly,
Just,
exactly.
I mean, there's a couple of dream projects I want to make. I'm very, but they're more. I suppose you classify them art house family dramas, but they're much harder to finance, even though they're lower budgets. So as a filmmaker, I mean, you're at the mercy of where the money is coming from. Basically, what film you can make. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a person who's always writing, who always has multiple projects on the go, and the ones that just seem to get made are horror. But that's not to put horror down. I
No.
love it. I'd very
Oh yeah.
happily make horror films for the rest of my life. I think it allows you complete freedom as a filmmaker. It frees you up. I mean, you can experiment visually and with sound and with structure, and the audience will accept it because it's a horror movie. You know, it
Exactly.
doesn't have to be realistic. And I always feel like cinema is like a waking dream. It's like dreams is the closest, you know, and I think the genre closest to that is horror, you know, and
Yeah,
so I'd be
exactly.
very happy to stay in that genre for the rest of my career.
That's awesome. Now, let's go back to Sun for a second. This is a great point. Most, because I do put Sun in the paranormal, supernatural because of the demonic entity and all that, even though it's not, doors opening and closing on themselves, the typical tropes that you see in other, paranormal films. But there's
Yeah,
also a good amount of blood and gore in that film.
yeah,
It's a nice mixture done very well, put together by you. Um, you don't really see that in a lot of paranormal films today. You see a lot of, ghosts, jump scares. I
yeah.
don't, I
It's
don't
true.
think there's a single jump scare in Sun. It's not a jump scare movie. It's not a jump
No.
scare movie. But yet there's a fair amount of gore in it, a lot of blood. How did you
Yeah.
balance those two out?
I don't know. I mean, the blood and gore. I just felt like a need. It always felt like it needed to be really brutal or something. You know, you needed really brutal and savage or something. You know, this shocking contrast between the boy and the innocence of the seemingly innocence of the boy when he's with his mother, and then this absolute ferocious brutality of it. You know,
Yeah,
I don't know why. I mean, it's probably the bloodiest film I have made, but in all my films, The Canal and Never Grow Old, and this one, there is a juxtaposition between this this loving tenderness with this sudden, swift change in mood to extreme violence. You know,
yeah,
and as I was saying earlier, I grew up in a very working class part of Dublin, and I have an early memory of my mother. I don't know. I was very young because I was holding my mother's hand. I must have been 5 or 6, maybe, and we were passing by a pub. I remember, and a dive of a pub in this really horrible part of Dublin. And these two guys fell out onto the pavement, and they were fighting. And I remember hearing, I can still remember the sound and seeing this guy's head being bashed
wow,
into the pavement, and the big pool of blood that was around his head. And I remember I was having this beautiful conversation with my mother. I don't know where we were. I can't remember, but I remember it was a loving conversation. And then all of a sudden, there was this sudden horrific violence in front of me, and then
wow.
she whisked me away, and it just stayed with me, you know. So I think that again, maybe it's that therapy thing again. It weaved its way into the
Yeah,
film, you know. But
it goes back to your personal experiences coming out in your
yeah,
films, which I
yeah,
see nothing wring with that. I think that's awesome. People bringing writers, especially, bringing their own life, personal experiences into their scripts. I think it makes it more realistic. And it makes
yeah.
it a lot more believable. We're
Mm.
almost out of time, but I do want to ask you. You have this film called Disassembled Men. It's just announced. I'm assuming it's not in production yet. You are
Yeah,
directing it. It doesn't show you as writing it. So what? And you also have, as a writer, a TV series called The Vanishing Triangle. So can you
yeah.
tell us anything about those two upcoming projects?
Well, the Disassembled Man. I mean, that's one I've been trying to get made for a good few years now. It's by the writer John Bassoff. It's a crime novel, and well, it's a psycho crime novel. I mean,
Okay.
it's pretty wild. It's really violent. It's really funny. Um, but it's been tough to finance now, to be honest. I think we're close now, so it's an absolutely fantastic script by John. I really recommend John Bassoff's books. He's just a fantastic writer, fantastic crime writer.
Yeah.
That border on horror as well. So horror fans, I'd say, would love them. The TV series is something I'm not directing. I'm just writing. It's based on a true story from the 1990s in Dublin. It's a true crime drama. It's set in the 1990s. It's been produced by MGM, and I'm doing that with Park Films, who I did The Canal and Son with, and I have a few other films in the works as well. I have a film called After I'm Gone. It's a post-apocalyptic movie. I didn't write that one either, but it's an absolutely wonderful script.
Awesome.
And that's very much into horror genre, but really, like Son and like The Canal and my other films, it's really emotional. It's all about family, and yeah, I'm really excited about that one. I think that one will probably be the one I do next.
Awesome. Now, The Vanishing Triangle seems to be your first dive into TV. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
No, I mean, I briefly, well, for about a year and a half or so, I wrote a pilot for USA Network and uh, yeah, BBC Worldwide, based on the Turn of the Screw, the ghost story, just after The Canal came out,
Okay.
and I think it was a fantastic script, but that didn't, for one reason or another, that didn't happen. So it wasn't my first foray into TV. This one is we're in the middle of writing all 8 episodes, so it looks like this one is definitely going to happen. But it's a different medium, you know.
Is it going to be
It's
in the US as well? Or is it going to be just in Europe?
No, well, it's been produced out of the US, so it's American money, but
Okay.
it's been going to be shot in Ireland.
Awesome. Awesome. Ivan, we are almost out of time. This has been one of the most fascinating hours. You're an amazing guest. It was been just such a pleasure to get to hear the inside thoughts that went behind such a great movie like Son and some of your other projects. This hour just flew by. I can't thank you enough for joining us. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we say goodbye?
Not really. Just it was a pleasure to be here. Great to talk to you. I
Great to
enjoyed it.
talk to you. Great to talk to you guys. And guys, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this interview. I know I did. Thank you to our special guest, writer, director, Ivan Kavanagh. Also, editor, producer, composer. Credits go on and on and on. There's nothing you haven't dived into. Instead of, the only thing missing is you doing a cameo in one of your own movies. So maybe one
I've
day.
done that. I've done that. Yeah,
Oh, well,
already.
that should definitely put that in there. All right. Well,
It's uncredited. Yeah.
well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you, Ivan, for joining us. Until next time,
That's fine.
guys, stay safe. And on behalf of Ivan and myself, stay walking. Good day. Bye bye.